Welcome and good evening. I almost feel like I need to apologize for using a microphone, but I don't have a big house voice. Uklamotla wiki kasi tsishata. My name is Randy Fred, and I'm tsishat from Port Alberni, and I've lived in Nanaimo most of my life, and uh, and I've been an elder in residence here for seems like a long time, but it actually hasn't been all that long. I think 3 years or maybe 2 years. It seems like a long time, but uh, I must acknowledge the fact that we are in the traditional territory of the Nanaimo, and very happy for them allowing us to be here and for benefiting from their history, language, and culture. And I have a long time relationship with many people from Nanaimo because many of them attended the Alberni Indian Residential School where I went to school. And following their protocol, I'll begin with a little prayer. Our loving Father, our Creator, we thank you so much for this day of life, and we thank you so much for everything you provide for us, for sustenance and for our enjoyment. And we thank you for being loving and teaching us about love and respect and empathy. And we ask you to please be with all our loved ones who are suffering any kind in any way, and please strengthen them and strengthen us. And thank you for being so forgiving. Amen. So when I think of recreation, I think of fun. So I'm going to start with a fun song. This is my father's, what's called in our language, Kwikwasha song. Hua hey yo ya hi sinai hi ya yo yo hey yo hua hi ya yo hi yo etu sha yo hi sinai hi ya yo hey yo hua hi yo etu sa hi sinai hey yo hua hi yo woo woo. So before I started school, my family lived way out in Barkley Sound between Banfield and Ucluelet, the Broken Group Islands, Deer Group Islands, and any kayakers would know that area because it's beautiful kayaking territory. And we always lived by ourselves on an island, and we moved from island to island. There used to be many salmon and seafood processing plants all along the coast, and many of them built shacks for their workers. And so in the 1950s, there were still a lot of these shacks. You know, most were dilapidated, but my dad would go to an island and pick the nicest one, and we would just move in. And you know, no rent to pay or anything, and it was nice. But you know, comfort back then was a lot different than today. You know, I remember like I had a little brother and little sister, and we would peek out between the boards to see what the weather was like outside. There was no insulation, and but my younger siblings were too little to play with me outside, so I spent a lot of time by myself, and it was nothing but recreation because I got to explore, and I would just explore it. And we always had a canoe, so you know, if it was safe enough, I would jump in the canoe by myself and go to another island and go and explore. And it was so much fun, you know, like so it was quite a drastic change when I had to go to school. But you know, back then there was somewhat of an abundance of seafoods. And this one place, the last place we lived was Daughters Cove, 3 miles outside of Bamfield. And there was a big kelp bed there. So it was just loaded with fish, in the kelp, and sea urchins at the bottom. There's a big rock face there. It had all kinds of invertebrates, mussels, barnacles, what we called haishtup, chitons, and this beautiful beach at the end of it. There was a clam bed that had little neck clams, and I would go there when I was hungry. I would eat them raw, and they were so tasty. But all that's gone now, and I blame the pulp mill in Port Alberni for that, the pollution. And the salmon were quite abundant still back then, and my dad, he did quite well fishing, but he was such a hard worker and such a great provider that I hardly ever saw him. And then, in the residential school, sometimes the supervisor, many of them were kicked out of the Navy or RCMP, and so to be cruel, they would punish us by, making us do like push-ups or something, not realizing that it was making us stronger. And we had great teams like soccer. Oh man, the soccer teams were so good, and softball, basketball. I never could play basketball because of my eyesight. But I was a great, great soccer player. I can brag about it. I scored a goal from 55 yards when I was 12 years old. That's a long ways. That's a long kick. And, the 12 and under soccer team that I was a captain of, we were just unbeatable. And then, one thing I have to encourage you is to really, really pay attention to being inclusive, because, being disabled, visually disabled, there's not a lot of sports I can play. They accommodate us with curling, but, how they had me curl was they put a bright spotlight in front of me, and I had to aim for it with the rock. But, in a game, I only got to throw 12 rocks, and the rest of the time I stood around shivering. So I didn't like it. So I moved to lawn bowling and been playing that for 22 years and 24 years, and went to New Zealand to play in an international tournament there, and that was so much fun. And I have a big bag of medals from, Canadian championships, provincial championships, and I'm going to make mobiles out of them, I think. But yeah, so I really want to encourage you to really, remember the disabled people. And, I got to share that the one thing I have great difficulty with is getting around, like getting a ride here and there. And, the staff here are very accommodating for me, and that's great. But, there's many times I had to miss playing lawn bowling because I just couldn't get a ride. So something for you to pay attention to in your community when you're working. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Welcome. Have a great conference. Shoot.
Thank you very much, Uncle Randy. At this time, I'd like to call VIU President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Deb Saucier, to the podium.
Oh, wow. Thank you and welcome, folks. Uncle Randy, I'll try and use my big house voice, although I don't come from a big house people. Asiem nasieya. Asiem snanemak mostimak. Asiem shashat mostimak. Asiem klaaman mostimak. Asiam snanawas mostimuk, Asiam quaqualicum mostimuk, Asiam kawitsin mostimuk, Asiam huamuk mostimuk, Asiam shusiem mostimuk. Enthapet sapico behescu iscu. Enthamanaat Ari Saucier and Marilyn Toronich. Tenitsanat, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Je suis un membre de la nation métisse d'Alberta et je suis né en Saskatoon et mes parents ont Henri Saucier et Marilyn Toronich. In English, I tell you my name given to me in ceremony on Alexander First Nation. And in English, my name is Deb Saucier, as Aggie told you. And I told you where I'm born, what nation I belong to, and who my parents are, so that if you know any of us or you know that place, you'll know whose stories I tell, whose stories tell about me, perhaps, and where I come from. And this is actually, really an interesting part for the conversation we're going to have, because, frankly, the future of recreation in rural communities and small cities is no small topic indeed. And it's an important one as it relates to folks in this room. And of note, I should thank a few folks as well, including our mayor, Leonard Krogh, and councillors who I can't see, but I'm told are here from the city. Also, the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association CEO, Martin Sampson, who's facilitating a conversation and consultation on the redevelopment of Canada's National Framework on Recreation. BC Parks and Recreation CEO, Katie Fenn, who is also here, who's going to be co-leading a session on bridging communications gaps between recreation and healthcare, and our speaker this evening, Jackie Oncescu. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Our keynote speaker, and welcome back to a former recreation and tourism management professor at VIU. Thanks for coming back. Her keynote tonight is going to talk about the things that are really important to all of us. Things like exclusionary mechanisms in community sport. I'll keep my comments short because we want to hear her, but I'm very struck by the idea that I learned about at a conference about 2 years ago, where it suggested that the reason that many young women don't go outside is because parks are not made for them. Skateboard parks are not made for them. Parks are made for little children or young men, baseball courts, basketball courts, etc. But there are very few things that are made for that. And if they exclude people like young women, I can only imagine how they exclude people like Uncle Randy. This is part of why I really love working at VIU, is because we talk about conversations like this that are really important to us. And this has been part of our fabric for more than 50 years. We've had a 2-year diploma in recreation that led into a Bachelor of Tourism Management with a major in recreation and a Master's of Arts in Sustainable Leisure Management. And I could talk about where our graduates go, but suffice it to say they go everywhere. They do everything. And the economic value of sport, physical activity, and recreation was estimated in 2022 at $37.2 billion with a B. 8.8 billion contributed from recreation and amusement, 6.9 billion from sports, and 21.5 billion in retail sales. That's no trivial number. So beyond the economic piece, though, the physical and mental health benefits of participation in outdoor recreation are well understood. We're all familiar with the dreaded thing in my childhood, which was participation, where, yes, everybody knows the Flex Star Mang, don't we? But the point then was not to punish teenagers. It was to actually try and encourage Canadians to participate in outdoor rec, to get active and to engage in probably the single most stunning aspect of being a Canadian, and that is our recreational opportunities. Those of you who live here know that we have amazing opportunities despite the ongoing epidemic of physical inactivity and social isolation. Just today, I was able to go outside with my dog, walk her down the way, and all of a sudden, everything that was weighing heavily on me went away for those 25 minutes when I was outside listening to the frogs sing, recognizing, as Aggie and I said, that Canadian rain gear is a little shorter than it should be given the rain that was happening today. But the kinds of things that the people in this room and that you're going to be speaking about today are those who are actually really involved in ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to participate in recreation. Community sports, boys and girls clubs, community service clubs, these all have a huge role to play in the social aspect of recreation and the relationships that we have to it. So last but not least, I'd be remiss in not noticing or mentioning that VIU's World Leisure Center of Excellence is celebrating an important milestone this year, its 15th anniversary. And through this center, which has a partnership with the World Leisure Organization, which has UN consultative status, our faculty and students play a global as well as local role through applied research on recreation and tourism, education and training, as well as convening academics like yourselves, practitioners like yourselves, and community partners at events like this. This is one of 7 World Leisure Centers of Excellence globally, which gives VIU and VIU students access to global reach, which is incredibly important for our students. Our students, for instance, have gone to New Zealand to learn more about the tourism industry there, as well as to learn about how the Maori are also participating and ensuring inclusive excellence in recreation and tourism there. I look forward to hearing more from our keynote speaker this evening and on how to design more inclusive recreational programming. And I thank you, Dr. Wheel, for the really kind invitation, and I turn it back to you. Hai siap kasiam chu. Thank you.
It is truly wonderful to work in a place where your boss actually understands who you are, what you do, and the value of what recreation and the program we do brings to our community. So thank you again, Dr. Saucier, for welcoming us. And please join your family with dinner. I haven't received a text telling me that Sheila has arrived, so we're going to continue on with our programming at this point. It gives me incredible pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Jackie Oncescu. Jackie is an award-winning scholar in leisure studies in Canada. As we mentioned, she is returning to VIU campus, and it's really nice to have her back here. Jackie is really recognized as a global leader in this space, in the space of ensuring that recreation and leisure and sport opportunities are more equitable, questioning the designs and the systems that we have and how those systems both privilege and exclude. She has recently participated in a UN panel to talk about equity, sport, poverty, and multiple, I can just see it, but we're going to skip Jackie, and I'm going to invite Sheila to the stage. Sorry. I feel like I am welcoming a marathoner. And I'm so honored that you took the time to come see to us today, given that you were just sworn back in. Right. So, perfect. Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'll turn the mic over to you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's lovely. Hi, Nanaimo friends, VIU friends. I'm Sheila. I'm your member of the legislature, and I just drove up from our swearing-in ceremony. So I am the freshest member of the Legislative Assembly you'll ever have in front of you. It was really beautiful. This time, when I was sworn in 2019, when I won in the by-election, Nanaimo drove over the Malahat in a snowstorm to sing and drum me into the legislature, and John Horgan walked me in the door. So it was a very emotional day today to be thinking back to that time. In this election, British Columbia voters elected 3 Indigenous women: Joan Phillip, who represents in Vancouver, Deborah Toporowski, who represents in Cowichan Valley, which is part of VIU's catchment, and Tamara Davidson, who represents up in Prince Rupert, North Coast Haida Gwaii. And so we've never in British Columbia elected a Haida Gwaii rep into the legislature before. And so to have those Haida drummers was incredible. So I'm bringing all that energy here to this space, grateful to be on Snuneymuxw territory. And really the only thing I want to say, just how glad I am that you're speaking to these issues, that you've chosen Vancouver Island University and Nanaimo to have that conversation. My background before I was elected was working in tourism, working on as an ocean kayak guide. I saw the magical effect of bringing people into contact with nature. As a government, we've been really working to try to support community organizations that are there to kind of take people by the hand, whether it's to kind of teach them how to fish or have environmental or recreation opportunities. And we do a lot of this sort of one at a time, small grant funding in Nanaimo, but certainly all over British Columbia. But I'll say that in my role as Social Development and Poverty Reduction Minister, I've increasingly been hearing, especially from local government reps, that they see in their own communities both the power of recreation as a way to connect and combat isolation. And we are even more aware of this, of course, after COVID. But that finances are a barrier for people. And so I'm really eager to hear what you incubate together. We are aware as a government, despite making up a huge amount of lost ground, both of putting money in people's pockets and combating poverty and trying to get more equitable access to resources and community resources to everybody. We still have some foundational and fundamental work to do, and we want to do that in partnership. And so I'm really grateful to you for inviting me just to add my voice to just proclaim the imperative for this work, and just to let you know how keen we as a government, David Eby and all of our government caucus, are to be to have ears wide open and listen to the solutions that you identify, and how honored I am to be some of the set of ears that gets to hear your work. Thank you.
This is the most awkward spot. So I'll just move those over there. I think I was pretty much finished introducing Jackie. It's been a bit about how today's gone. But I really do want to thank everyone who's come into the audience to hear this. I want to thank Mayor Krogh, Sheila, Deb, who has stepped out. Our provost, Mike Quinn, is in the audience, and my dean, Sung-Chul Choi, is in the audience. And I just want to let you all know how incredibly important your presence here is, because it tells us that we're supported, and that's really wonderful in this day and age. But it also lends sort of credibility to the importance of the work that everyone else in this room is doing. And so without further ado, I will invite Jackie up to the podium.
Perfect. Oh, that's a bright light. You can't really see anyone's faces, so thank you. I'm gonna probably end up moving around a little bit. I get a little excited when I do this work. And every time I talk, just moments before, and I've done this a number of times, I always feel my heartbeat start to like pick up a bit. And it reminds me of one of my first interviews that I ever did in a social housing unit with a family in poverty, which I'm gonna share about today. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about who I am and kind of how I've landed in this topic area and the work that I do. I think it's really important. I'm not supposed to touch this, am I, Max? Okay, hands down. Hands down. Give you a sense of who I am, where I come from, because I think it's really important that you understand the lens that I look at the work and my experiences, because we all bring our own experiences and view of the way we see the world to the work that we do, and it shapes the way we see people in our lives. So I'm cisgender, middle class, grew up on a farm in middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, farm girl, and you couldn't get me off the farm fast enough when I was old enough to leave. I love going home, and sport was a big deal for me growing up and in small communities. And I remember one time someone said to me, you know, the things you experience, you know, in your life that could be like positive or negative, sometimes follow you into your career. And it's really true. I think where I felt I belonged was probably on a ball field or a volleyball court, somewhere in the middle of Saskatchewan, and in a hockey rink or in a school gymnasium. And it brought me a lot of joy. And everyone probably has a story of like, I remember when, because every time I do this work and talk about sport and recreation and where we are today and where we were 20, 30 years ago, they're like, it never used to be this way. And it's true, but exclusion's always been a part of the recreation and sports system. So my work is largely centered on the last 12 years, working with families that experience poverty and low income. For the presentation today, I'm going to refer to the residents that I work with, the citizens, as equity owed. The people I work with come from very diverse backgrounds, different abilities, different race, different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So there's not just one type of person in poverty, but all the people I work with that are equity owed share a lived experience of low income and poverty. I've been blessed to do this work for the last 12 years, and it's been everything that I do and love to do. So my intention for today is to share a bit of the work that I've been doing for the last 12 years with equity owed residents as side by side as my friends and as family and as research participants and community residents, trying to shape the way that our sector responds to those most in need around recreation. I'm gonna get my clicker here. Maybe. So I might end up crying up here today. Uncle Randy I just met, and he shared something that just landed with me, and he said storytelling is healing. And my goal today is to share a series of stories of the work that I've been doing to convey kind of where I think we need to go with recreation and sport in Canada. So this is the System Shifters. This is the team I've been working with for the last 3 years. I'm at UMB in Fredericton. I've been running a multi-year project in partnership with the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation, which is the Crown Corporation in charge of poverty reduction for the province of New Brunswick, and the Recreation and Sport branch. This is our team, some students, some residents, and my collaborators and researchers. I think it's really important for me to share our team with you, because the work I am sharing is all of our work, and it's not just mine, but I'm just blessed to be here to share this story. I'm going to be conveying some of the stories of the work I've done by witnessing and working side by side with equity owed residents, and how it's transformed my life as a researcher, and how I hope it can transform our communities as well. So as I kind of said, my heart always beats a little faster, and I've been doing this work for a while. And as I thought about sharing with you the stories, there's some vignettes. I wanted to be a bit of storytelling to take us on a bit of a journey of how the recreation and sport systems tend to be experienced for equity owed residents through what I have sat down and listened to and worked with, and how that work is shaping where I think we need to go. And the first story, and I do this one all the time, I share this one all the time, and it's shattering the should be. Growing up, my dad, God love him, he'd always be like, you know what you should do? And nothing would set me off more than my dad saying, you know what you should do. And I remember thinking about this when I did my first interview. I was working for an organization in Manitoba called Recreation Opportunities for Children. They work specifically with families that face economic barriers, low income families in poverty, and their goal is to work with families, for families, to get them access and support to recreation. It's incredible. They've been operating for 15 years. It's one of a really unique system. And one of my jobs was to connect with families to help design what they wanted with that organization. So we do a bit of co-design as a method to working side by side. And we co-designed, worked with the staff, worked with the families, and then we get to implement, what they wanted to have as support and services. And then I got the chance to do some evaluations and interviews. So I remember I pull up to the social housing unit, I get out of my car, knock on the door, and I sit down, and you could tell how nervous the mom was to sit with me. I'm a stranger from a university, and we feel like we're in different worlds. And as we got chatting and I was asking questions, I said, tell me a little bit about rock and your experiences and what you've enjoyed. And she was really open about the experiences. And one of the things she said to me was, I don't want those bikes that Rock wanted to give my boys. It's really hard for me. And I sat there for a minute and I was like, interesting. And I asked her, can you tell me more? Does anyone have a guess why? I always ask this question. I make this interactive, but anyone know why the mom didn't want the bikes for her two boys? She didn't have one? Or didn't know how to ride? That's great. Anyone else have a guess? Yeah? Anyone? So thank you for sharing. I get a lot of different answers when it comes to this question, and I don't think anyone's ever really hit it on the head. She said, I don't want to have the bikes because they're so nice, and if they get stolen, I can't replace them. So I'd rather them not have the experience at all. And in that moment, everything for me changed. And I remember getting in the car after that interview, and I cried. And I was like, I remember calling my mom. This is my first academic position. And I was like, I don't think I know what I'm doing. I don't think I know. You just spent all this year, you just got your PhD, you're kind of conditioned to think you're an expert. And I'm like, no, definitely in the wrong industry. And in that moment, I drove home and I thought a lot about it. And that interview is it shattered the should for me. And we should a lot on equity owed residents. You know what you should do? You should do this. This is going to be really good for you. You know what you should do? And I love how the recreation and sports system does have a giving model. There's a lot of charity that's built into recreation and sport. We fundraise, we do equipment drives. We've been trained to give. And it was intended to be a gift to a family. And for many families, not a problem. Take the bikes, live your best life, 100%. But I think what's really important with what I'm trying to share is that without the lived experience, the wisdom of lived experience, I'm not too sure that we even know what to do moving forward. And for me in that moment, I knew that everything that I thought I should do changed. And it changed the way that I do the research that I do. Our approach is typically a top-down in New Brunswick, where I am. Lots of our recreation delivery systems are where we deliver 2 and 4 people. And moving towards designing with is where I think we need to go. Another example of this work is we're really good at designing fee assistant programs and subsidies for people that need access, and equipment and finances are really important. We do need fee assistant programs. And I remember it was the same organization, and I was chatting with the staff, and one of the things that we do in recreation and sport is we sometimes want to shepherd people with our subsidies into certain activities that we think that they should be doing, like physical activity. So we have limitations in some of our fee assistant programs where they require it to be organized, leader-led recreation, physical activity, and then they'll subsidize it. It's a way to get people moving. And I appreciate that we have that. And I remember this one family, the boys were really, these two teenage boys were really interested in photography, but there's far fewer fee assistant programs for arts and culture in most of the province. Saskatchewan has Creative Kids, which is a mirror organization to kids sport, which is great. But in Manitoba, they didn't have that. So the organization, they cover all of those leisure activities where other grants fall to the wayside. And it's so funny because we design these provisions where we think, oh, this is what we need to do. It's going to get people active. So cameras weren't subsidized for these two boys. But what do you think that they did that got them active and active with their mom? Any guesses? Wildlife photography. These two boys were so jazzed about wildlife photography. They got their mom out of the house, they're in the wild, and they're off doing photography, and they're hiking, family bonding. But our subsidies say that that experience isn't what they should be doing or what we value, but yet they did get the outcome that they wanted. So what I've come to learn is that we get really stuck on what we think people should be doing. And then we build our resources, our provisions, our policies, and our services around our shoulds. I don't have the lived experience of poverty. I don't know what it's like to live in deprivation. I don't know what it's like to have chaos. And so any provision that we design often is void of the lived experience when we do a top-down delivery system. So when we work side by side and we build relationships with families that can tell us what their lives are really like, we don't have to say what we should do. We can just ask, what would you like? This story is about the same organization, and this comes from a young boy that was ripping apart a small town in Manitoba. Vandalism, theft, graffiti, and say a little prayer for me. This particular community is quite religious and quite pissed off with this young boy, and they started a prayer group. and my collaborator, who is the executive director of this particular organization, shared this story with me. And she worked with this boy in grade 2 from a small community. Family needed access to gas and transportation. And so this executive director, their organization offers transportation support. So they go to the local gas station and then put money on to the gas station so that the parent could come and fill up for gas. Like there was just like credit on this particular account. And the owner of the gas station knew Moni and kind of had a sense of the organization's mission and what they were up to. And they were quick to say how pissed they are about this family and this little fella and the damage that's been happening and the prayer group and all of this. And so Moni's been working, their team had been working with the family, and the little boy wanted to get into a particular sport, and he got into the sport. And then what ends up happening is, well, he's not ripping around doing graffiti anymore for the community, he's playing sport. And a couple weeks or a month later, my collaborator goes to the gas station, and the gas station owner goes, "So you're the angel?" And she's like, "I don't know what they're talking about." And they had a quick conversation, and they said, that little fella's like, he looks really happy, and he's like doing really great. And it's interesting because the image of this young fella, the prayer group was also, they wanted the family out of town. You can imagine what maybe some prayers were being shared. And so, after all this mischief and all this destruction, and then the turnaround, and then how they saw the link between sport and recreation. And so when Moni had come back to pay some more money, the family and the community went from, we got to get this family out of town, this kid's, this isn't good, to, so you're an angel. And I've been sitting with this story for a while, and my friend Moni shares it quite a bit. And, the thing that we came to connect with on it was when we do this work with families and we work with people that are equio, their lives are not easy. And we know sport has lots of benefits. But one of the challenges I face as I do work with equity-owed residents is often the disconnect between the interconnectedness of poverty. It's a community issue. And the not in my backyard is not helpful. And the divide that we're feeling in society of us versus them and pointing fingers at who's the problem is not helpful. And so one of the things about working in relationship and in co-design is that when we bring residents with different lived experience, a provider, a neighbor, the business owner to the same space to understand each other's lived experiences, people start to see the interconnectedness of the challenge of poverty, that it is all of us. We're on different ends of the spectrum. But I can tell you in Fredericton right now, we just had a downtown business meeting. There's been a lot of challenges with unhoused population. Crime is increasing. And the attitude in the room is that this isn't our problem. Someone else needs to fix it. But poverty doesn't work that way. It's interconnected. We're all part of the solution. We're all part of the problem. People in sport and recreation benefit when they don't have to cater to somebody that needs extra assistance. As Uncle Randy was saying, transportation can be challenging for people with visual impairment. Having to make adaptations nudges people of privilege to have to accept something that's different, and that's really hard to do, especially when we're talking about poverty and poverty reduction, and more importantly, when we're talking about inclusion and access and making things more adaptable. So one of the things that co-design has done in our work is it's helped us and help people see that we're all interconnected in this, that this kid's lived experience of poverty is that gas station's problem, and they could be part of the solution too. So this story, I work with a collaborator and they're super creative, and she submitted she didn't tell me, she submitted a conference presentation to the New Brunswick Research Council and titled it "The Spandex People, Shame and Stigma of Physical Activity Environments." And then I got the email that I submitted it. She submitted it on my behalf. And I was like, well, this will get some attention. I did ask my grad student if she would go in spandex to do the presentation. I thought that would be helpful. This story is about one of my recent team members, Tanya, who has lived experience of living low income, and she was sharing a story about her kickboxing experience. And she referred to people in the gym as the spandex people, and it really did stick. And this is about getting through the door. Tanya had stated, and I have some of her quote from the conversation that we had. And this project that we're doing in New Brunswick right now is we have a team of equity-owed residents, 6 equity-owed residents that we connected with after doing a year-long community engagement in communities in 2 different regions in New Brunswick. And I'm going to share more tomorrow in our workshop. But essentially what we did is as a team, we went into community, we built relationships with service providers that are connected and have relationships with equity-owed residents, got a sense of the community, and then we asked some of those community providers if they'd help us recruit equity-owed residents to come share stories with us. What do you like about the community? Where are you going in the community? Where are you not going in the community? And Tanya was one of them. And so after we connected with about 100 equity-owed residents in these workshops. Then we invited 6 of them to be part of our system shifters. And they designed our co-design and called themselves the system shifters. And so Tanya was one of them. And she had such deep wisdom for us. And she was sharing this story. And I pulled this quote because I think sometimes when it comes to designing for recreation and sport, people of privilege think it's just an economic issue. It is so much more than that. Tanya said, I was terrified. I vomited before I went in. She was referring to kickboxing. I was absolutely sure I was going to be laughed out of there. Tanya tried every which way from Sunday to create excuses to not go to kickboxing with her friend. Tanya was conveying more than what it is about, that it's more than economic resources that prevent people from participation. When Tanya went, she was going into this scenario. It was with a friend, and the friend was like, "I'll go with you. I've got you. We'll go. You'll be fine." And then Tanya's like, "I don't got shoes." She goes, "I'll get you shoes." "I don't have the clothing." She got the clothing. She goes, "It's too expensive." She got it for free. "I don't know the instructor." "I'll introduce you to the instructor." This friend broke down every possible excuse that I'm sure we all have had in something that we didn't want to do. And it was interesting because Tanya was sharing, like, it wasn't about the shoes and the equipment and the instructor, even though it was, but it was the fear of being in the setting with people of privilege. Walking through the door with a cloak of shame and living in deprivation, walking into a fitness center with a bunch of people in their spandex, knowing that you don't got any spandex or you don't want to be in the spandex, but that looks like what you need to fit in. Tanya was terrified, literally vomited before going into kickboxing. The fear that people feel entering into privileged spaces, which recreation and sport, if it's a closed access, is really fearful for our residents to walk through that door on their own. So when we do co-design, part of what works for us is that it's about the relationship building, so that if it's the YMCA that's sitting at the table or the kickboxing instructor, we're building a relationship so it's easier for that person to walk through the door. They have support. One of the things that we're noticing through all the work is the essential need for social support. Yes, we need the fee assistance. Yes, we need the equipment. And yes, we need the transportation. And I can tell you, we can give our families all of that, and they will not show up to the kickboxing, the taekwondo, the gym, or the yoga studio. There's a ton of fear that comes with entering these spaces, and I'm going to get to why that's the case, and it's something for us to consider. One of the things about building relationships and doing co-design and working with is that providers get to build relationships with people that they often can't reach. In New Brunswick, a lot of our smaller communities are focused on facility management. I know most of everyone in here is coming from rural communities. We are shy on recreation directors and programmers and programming in New Brunswick. And so we're getting better, and we're getting that sector more staff that do programming. But one of the challenges that we're having is that in recreation, and there's probably, I won't be able to tell, but there might be a few nods. In rural communities, some of your biggest line item budgets are the facilities that are attached to sport, like an arena. And so the rec directors are often just in conversation with privileged user groups that use these facilities. They're not as exposed to those that aren't using it. And they also don't have the time, if they don't have the staff, to build those relationships with those that aren't in those spaces and places. So one of the things that co-design does for us is that it exposes privilege. You feel your privilege. I feel my privilege quite often, and it's uncomfortable, and that's a good thing. We need to get uncomfortable. We need to feel what our privilege is and what it does when we build our provisions from a place of privilege. And one of the things we did in our co-design just about a year ago is we worked in a rural community called St. George, New Brunswick. And St. George has Cook's Aquaculture, billion-dollar fish seafood plant. They bring a lot of newcomers over to work in the plant, and it's a rural fishing village. And families from all over the world are showing up to the middle of nowhere coastal community in New Brunswick, and it's tough. And one of the residents that works, that's on our team, her name's Hope, and she's from Uganda. And Hope couldn't get her kids in sport. It was too expensive. And most of the things that were offered in the winter were hockey, and they didn't even know what hockey was. But she knew that she couldn't afford it, and they didn't have the transportation to do it. So Hope was in one of our focus groups, and we had quite a few newcomers in that focus group, and they shared quite a bit about living in the community. And so we asked Hope to be on our team. She's been great. And then when we got into testing our co-design in the community, we had a recreation director from the YMCA that was willing to partner with us to help Hope have the opportunity to build something in the community to address barriers that people in the community are facing that are new. So we have Paige, our newcomer from Uganda, or Paige from the YMCA, and we got Hope from Uganda, and they came together with our team to co-design play boxes in the community. And they did a great job. And I don't want to give all of the stories and everything away for tomorrow, but they built a social event. We got the play boxes built, but one of the experiences of co-design that's really important about this is that Paige and Hope were populating the play box with the materials that should go in it for the community. And Hope's goal is to get newcomers and anybody in the community just access to free, like unstructured play equipment so that everyone can play. And Paige is working on this too, and they're brainstorming, what they could put in there. Well, Paige is from that community, born and raised, thinking about the winter and like what equipment should go in there. And Hope's thinking about what equipment are people going to know what it is, not about the winter. And during the interview with Paige after the co-design experience, Paige, this is one of Paige's quotes, and she just went on, almost it felt like confession. She goes, I don't know why. Like, I don't know why I'm assuming that they're okay with this weather and why I'm assuming that they want to come out and be a part of it. Like, why am I making these assumptions? Like, she went down the rabbit hole of why in our interview. And she goes, it didn't even dawn on me. And she was talking about putting in some equipment and how Hope said, you can't put that in the box. And Paige is like, well, why not? Nobody knows what that is from Uganda. And it, like, something so simple, we're just populating a box of goods. But it isn't the most important thing about co-design. The most important thing for me in this story is now Paige is going to walk through the community with a different lens on how she should be doing the work she's doing and challenging her assumptions, challenging her privilege, starting to think about what would life be like here for a newcomer. And that's Hope's wisdom and expertise at that table. We will not get to inclusion without lived experience expertise. We're so divided right now in society, it doesn't matter what we're referring to. There's this divide, and we can feel it. You can say where it came from. There's lots of reasons why it's here. And if we want to create inclusive spaces and places, it's going to rely on a system that is tapping into residents' skills, talents, and wisdom that we are not designing for. Sport and recreation in Canada is designed in a user fee model. I think that's actually going to help with my next slide. And in Canada, and I'm going to speak very specifically, I've worked in most provinces, and it's like an all-inclusive resort. Even though I know many of us work really hard at it, but I want to kind of describe what it's like for our residents in a user fee model. And I get we're tied by this. I have lots of empathy for our government and our providers because things are tight, and the rec sector is doing a lot. But what ends up happening for our citizens and our residents that are equity owed, when we build a user fee model, we target one population, typically those that can pay. We've been doing this since the late 70s when the government turned and pulled back funding. We went through the recession in the 80s, and that's when the benefit-based movement came in the 90s, because now recreation had to sell themselves on benefits. And then we had to operate like a business. Well, if any of us were going to operate a business, you're going to target people that can pay for your service. So 40, 50 years later, we've designed beautifully a user fee system for those that can afford to pay. And what we've ended up creating, because we don't have enough resources, are day passes to an all-inclusive resort in Canada. For me, where I stand on this work, recreation is not a right, it is a privilege, and it's a luxury. It's so expensive to do certain activities in this country. It doesn't matter if you're in PEI or Newfoundland. It's expensive. You all know your budgets, and you have to charge. I understand that and I have empathy. But what we've got to figure out is, how do we get rid of the day passes, right? Because we know recreation is preventative health. We know what benefits come from it, but we've privatized it in our user fee system. It's closed. We have open and closed access. We often refer to parks and trails and playgrounds, relatively open. I'm like, is it safe? Are the curbs cut? Transportation? Like, I get that it's not truly open, nothing's truly accessible. We have to think about that. And then we have closed access, which is, we were talking about doors and keys. Is that the keys and fees, right? And keys and fees, and that's more closed. And Colleen, who's from Upagansik First Nations, she's on our team. Amazing woman, elder, dropped wisdom bombs on us the whole 3 years. These are her quotes, and she goes, "There's the regulars who look at you as if, how did you get in here?" She was referring to the aquatic center. Because of the price and because of the regulars, to think that they own the place. So we're starting to see this narrative. I'm having parks departments call me and ask about how to handle the challenges they're facing in open spaces and parks, because we have more people of diverse backgrounds in large groups congregating in parks, and people are uncomfortable that aren't used to seeing that. And we have, in this case, Colleen's in the co-design experience, all the residents got to pick one thing that they wanted to tackle, and we co-designed the solution that they'd like to see in place. And Colleen said, elders don't feel comfortable in the aquaplex, in this recreation plex. And she always referred to them as the regulars. And she said, we don't get to be here all the time. Like, we only get to come at a certain hour because that's when it's free. Right? So this is this kind of like day pass, or this, and these are the ways that we're trying to make it work, right? These are the things that we're trying to do to create access. And I love that we do this, and we do need to do this. But I wouldn't be doing my job as a critical scholar if I didn't call attention to some of the challenges that our provisions cause around exclusion. So what Colleen and our team did, and this was super cool, we did a bus trip with the elders. So we bused the elders up to the rec center. So the rec director was fully on board. Colleen and the rec director co-designed a sharing circle and a tour of the facility for elders. And we had 15 elders came up. We had all the staff in the rec center and the elders, and we did small sharing circles, and the elders shared what they liked about the center and what they didn't. They got a tour. They got to check out some of the equipment. They had videos. We built relationships between the staff and the elders. And what ended up happening? More elders in the facility. More elders. All we did was a bus trip with the elders. And we brought the director and Colleen together. Colleen's still a little pissed because she hasn't seen their First Nations flag being posted, and the writing is too small. She made it very clear. So there's still work to do, but just as we just did a small experiment on co-design, and it helped the elders just feel that they belong there. They didn't change the fee structure. They didn't change that they couldn't offer more hours. They did give them free passes and things like that and explain more, but it wasn't about that. They now know the staff, and they feel like they have a relationship, and they feel like they have a stake in the game, because now they're seeing their needs in that facility, even if they're not there all the time and still only on day passes. So one of the things that the day pass does is it creates a narrative of us and them. And one of our participants, Kyle from Upagansik First Nation, he is a former system shifter. Kyle passed away during our project, complicated health conditions. It was the first time in my research program that I had to tell my research team that someone passed away and go to an end-of-life ceremony. And Kyle, he's just the gentlest soul. And during our co-design experience, when we first met everybody, we were online, like doing everything, because we were all around the province. And I got to give technology credit. It did help us do this work, because we could connect with people in northern New Brunswick and southern New Brunswick. And Kyle was at one of our community workshops, and we invited him to be a part of our crew to design, and he was all in. And the first time I met Kyle, I wasn't in the community workshop, but we were all online. And Kyle, this is the best part about my job, is just the privilege of being people letting me into their space, into their homes, and into their lives. And Kyle pops up on the video screen on Zoom, and he's weaving a basket with a wood-burning stove in his shop. And I was like, this is the work. This is a man that's shown up, doing his basket weaving, wants to help out the community in his most authentic way. And this is Kyle's quote. So one of the things we did when we brought the residents together we did the community workshops, invited 6 together. We took those 6 residents through what we call a sprint design for 6 weeks, 3 hours a week. We took them through a series of activities to decide what we need to test in the community. And so Kyle was part of that. And as we were brainstorming and doing the facilitation, this was one of the quotes that came up that really stood out to me in the work and some of the issues that we're facing in community. Kyle said, so they're brainstorming about, like, how do we offer discounts? Like, how do we do this so that it'll be effective? Like, they're in problem-solving mode. It was so empowering to see, like, just seeing them create solutions that they were really attached to. And Kyle said, we were talking about one particular idea, because they all got to brainstorm and bring their ideas to the table. And then we all got to share our, like, I don't know if that'll work. Maybe it will. And Kyle said, in this particular idea, he goes, I think we got to find a way to introduce it slowly and softly so we don't introduce hate. This sucks, because all Kyle wants is for his kids to be able to play and provide a discount. And they're all worried about the rest of the community hating them because they would have an advantage, a discount. He's worried about the hate that they're going to experience because they're trying to create advocacy and access for people that deserve it. When Kyle passed away, he left behind 3 kids. And we know, in particular for Kyle's situation, his wife that was left behind is more likely to experience poverty when you lose a spouse and an income and you're left with 3 kids and a single income. And, I think about this work, and I knew I'd end up crying. And I think about Kyle, and he shouldn't be concerned about hate when all we're trying to do is get his kids, my nieces and nephews, other people's kids, into an activity that they deserve to have. Our system, and there's no one reason and fault for this, but our system has created us and them. I see it a lot in sport. I see it because sport's built on competition. The ideologies of sport, excellence, performance, right? The ideologies of public recreation, public good, mostly. That's the ideology is like, we've got to reach the public good. But the problem is that the two come together because we need municipal recreation infrastructure for sport to operate. And in New Brunswick, in the smaller communities, they rely a lot on the sports sector for the programming, and that's it. And that becomes problematic because sports quite exclusive in New Brunswick. And so when we were working through this brainstorming and problem solving, we were in a safe space with residents that they could fully share. Like, this is never going to work, Jackie. I remember I brought one idea to the table. I thought it was like kind of good. It's like, that's terrible. And I was like, yeah, you're right. This is really bad. Now that you say it that way, and they explained it, there was just this level of trust and openness and capacity to give critical feedback. But the unintentional consequences of some of the access provisions that we do and put in place in community actually creates an us and them, because the system's not designed for them. The system's designed for people that can afford to be there. And then the people that can be there feel that they deserve it because they've earned it. A lot of our residents that live in poverty don't feel that they're valuable in Canada because they're not economically contributing. They're considered to be economically draining. And that's a narrative that they carry with them. And other people in community, and I hear it all the time, that are privileged, they have this idea that they're entitled to certain spaces because they're fundraising. I see how much my friends fundraise for sport. I know how many pop bottles I'm giving them, like I see how hard the sports system has to work to create sport. It's not easy. They're tired. And of course they're going to feel like they deserve to have full access and they could do what they want and go where they want because they're fundraising all over the place. But what it does is it creates an us and them narrative when we try to break through and create a bit of access for somebody that can't maybe participate to the same degree. So I'm almost to the end of my storytelling, and then I'm going to share with you what I think would be a really cool thing that we could do. And I think BC's prime for this, especially here at VIU. So the cost of indulgence. There's a thought of sport and recreation being an indulgence rather than a need. And this is Tanya, one of our residents and members. I feel guilty if I spend money on pottery classes that I'm so interested in. I feel guilty because that money could be used and needed in many other ways. I had a number of families. I remember sitting down in our first workshop in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, and we would gather, we'd eat together, we played, connected over some games. These people we'd never met when we first connected in the community workshops. And one couple came in. Some of them came just to eat food and get paid $50. I don't care. I don't. I'm glad they're there, and I'm glad they're getting food, and I'm just glad that they're there. And this one family that was sitting there, we were chatting, and I, asking how's it like living in St. Stephen? Because we don't want to make this about tell me how being broke is. We just want to know, how is your experience in community? However that is. Maybe it's amazing, and maybe it isn't. And this one family, this husband and wife were there, and they had 2 kids, and it was Christmas, and across the hall, the kids were all singing Christmas carols. It was like November, December. They had just gotten out of living in tents with their kids. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing trying to get kids, and people access to something that brings them joy when these 2 kids have been living in tents most of the summer and the fall with their parents? And it connects to this quote because I have had many families that are equioed ask me to just work on something else with basic needs. And I understand why, but I also understand the power of recreation and the importance of people having access to something that brings them joy, even if they are living in deprivation. Do they deserve it? But one of the challenges that we're going to have to deal with in recreation is that we can provide them with everything. But because it's a luxury, because it's an indulgence, they're going to feel guilty. And I see this over and over and over again with our families. We will get them the transportation that will break down every barrier. And they're in a small town, and if someone sees them in a sport activity, they feel that they're going to be judged for it because, what are you doing here? You can't afford this. You can't, we know you're on social assistance. And people feel guilty treating themselves. This is the problem with the system, is that it's an indulgence. It's not a right. It's not a necessity, even though we know all the benefits that come from it. So the challenges that I've seen as I work with residents and practitioners has shaped the way that I do the work that I do. And when I started with the government of New Brunswick, they onboarded me 3 years ago after finding out the work that I've been doing in other places. And they wanted me to actually just design and implement from a top-down perspective what we had done in Manitoba. And I said, not happening. Let's build this with your residents and your sector. Let's do this collectively. And when we started, the province, the Crown Corporation that's in charge of poverty reduction, funded by social development, and they run as a Crown Corporation, so it's a little bit different. Their goal, the agency, and I love that they had recreation and sport as a priority area for their action plan. That's how I got this project going. And theirs was create access and inclusion. And we see this language a lot. They were like, we just want to get Equitio, deserve to be there. They know the benefits. Great. We're running with it. After we went through our sprint design with our 6 Equitioed residents, they said that's not good enough. We don't want to be included. We don't want to have access. We want to feel that we belong. And we want dignified access. So we changed. I didn't even tell the branch. They're fine. They're fine. And they trust me. And so we changed it. I mean, we're working towards the same thing. We just got a little bigger and bolder with our how might we. So we shifted, we work from like how might we statements quite a bit. But one of the things we have to think about is whose outcome matters. Whether we're government, whether we're recreation, whether we're professors, autonomy and the freedom to choose is really important. Our outcome of what we want and what we think others should have might not be what works for them. Some people, it will be in their best interest never to be in a hockey rink. It will be in their best interest never to set foot in a pool. It may be in their best interest to fly kites and paint and maybe go on walks. We can think about what we're trying to achieve, but at the end of the day, the policies and the provisions that we want to create need to be created by the people that are going to experience them for them to have any effect. So what do we do? How do we move forward? We work in a transactional way in a business model, predominantly in recreation, and the more robust, and some of your communities might have really great programs and services that have community development and grassroots, so that's awesome. But as a whole system, in public service, in recreation, in education, in healthcare, I don't care where we go, what sector we're doing, it's time to start working in a relational welfare model. And Hillary Cottam defines and describes relational welfare as a radical change in which relational bonds between human beings serve as the starting point for health and well-being in the 21st century. Dr. Marmot, the godfather of the social determinants of health, says, without citizen participation and community engagement fostered by public service organizations, it will be difficult to improve the penetration of any intervention, I'm putting any in there, to impact health inequalities. This means that there's this notion that we used to have this stronger welfare state, and then we govern in Canada and in most of the provinces from a neoliberalism ideology, economic efficiencies, accountability, and individualism. Recreation is delivered with those principles. It's for efficiencies, economic efficiencies. This is a business model. It's not working. It's not going to work moving into the future. The further divided we get, we can't keep treating people as customers. We have to treat people as residents, and we have to bring people together. Human-centered and collaborative approaches premised on human rights and social justice and sustainable and development in society. We have to see people as co-creators, and that the relationships between us is a collective responsibility. It's our collective relationships that become the center of all development in a relational welfare model. For me, doing this work side by side with residents for about 12 years, co-creating, building, it's the only way out. Even if we can't get rid of poverty, but we can make people's experiences and community feel better if we design with them. We've designed the public out of our services in many ways. The public that needs us the most, that I'm referring to today, have not been designed in our systems. Co-design, designing for belonging, relational welfare, relational government, relational governance models, relational public service models are all coming out in different ways. And we have to start thinking about how we bring people back together. Life's a little messy right now, right? We're all having a human experience. We're seeing different global elections and divides, and we're feeling further apart than ever before, and a business transaction is not going to bring us back together. It's people. So as I close, I just want to draw attention to a quote that really stuck out with me. When dreaming about the future, it's valuable to dream with others. We don't make change by ourselves. It's time for us to think about designing for belonging and who needs to be in the room and how we do it together. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Hi. I'm more curious from the funding side, from your programming experience, just because like we always hear tax dollar, tax dollar, tax dollar. So again, when we talk about we don't want to create that hate and create that divide, when you introduce this theory to perhaps a city council, and they're going, well, our tax dollar, our citizens, our first thing I thought of anyways is how do they feel about their tax dollars potentially supporting those individuals in need? So do you often see pushback, or do you what are the comments you hear when you sort of present this type of information to a city council, for example?
Great question. This is tricky. We were funded really quite well by the provincial government to do this. It was short term. It was a pilot. But when we presented in October, I presented the findings to the Union of Municipalities in New Brunswick. So like all the mayor and councils for the province, across the province. It was so well received because they in the room, they wanted what we were doing. And everyone was in agreement that it was important. But everybody in the room knew that more resources needed to come from the province to municipalities to do the work. So it's not that, I think in the room, the temperature in the room that day was like, yeah, they got it, they understood it, they understood the exclusion, and they wanted to see it in their communities. I had several invitations after that presentation to be like, can you come present this to our council? Like they need to see this and understand it. But yeah, if we could package it up with the funding, they were all in. Like it wasn't a matter of like convincing them. It's convincing them when it's their own budget, which got trickier. So we were funded quite well to do this, but what we don't have is the sustained funding yet. We're working on how do we get more sustained funding and how do we do this moving forward. And it also, I'm going to take this a little further, is I'm working with the provincial government to see if there aren't resources and ways that we can rework what we're doing. So in New Brunswick, we have community developers in the Horizon, like in our health district. We have community developers in each of the kind of the counties. We have community resilience committees, and we have all this pocket of money that are all going to the same committees doing the same thing, but nobody's working together. I could identify in one county at least 8 people that are all doing the same thing, that if we work together, and we were talking about this today, the intersectoral pieces, where you could probably get to an efficient co-design experience. You just have to get those sectors in the room to redesign the system structures so that our practices, and that's where I think this needs to go. Where we're going with this is the way that we are trying to tackle some of these issues is being done by multiple sectors. We got to get our practices aligned in the sectors truly doing and working in a different way. And I think that would help in terms of the fiscal pieces, because then you can be like, oh, we got these it's a different way of looking at the map of resources. But it's a long-winded answer for your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. Just before I sort of thank Jackie and release you all to enjoy some food and beverage that's waiting for us in the lobby, I just want to comment on some of the themes that have been coming through all of the discussions today. And we really have been having these conversations about thinking about differently about our system, right? Thinking about equity. How do we provide services for the unserved? And then thinking about Jackie's presentation and that focus on privilege. One of the things I'm becoming known for is having very unpopular opinions. And I'm going to share a few with you. Marissa, your question about how do people feel about offering this kind of programming, right? Spending our tax dollars on this kind of activity. And the implicit piece, and I'm not attributing this to you, but the implicit piece is that is our tax dollars on those people, right? That's part of this conversation. We don't ask that question about why are we spending so much money on the very, very small part of our population that plays hockey. Nobody asks that question because that's Canadian and we have to offer that service, right? If you dared to suggest that we are going to stop building arenas in Canada so that we can offer services to more residents of Canada, right? We don't really critically dig into the fact that that one game that we think of as part of our identity is becoming more and more and more exclusionary every single year because of the cost of that activity. And that's tax dollars, right? And believe me, I'm not saying we need to get rid of hockey. Never going to be brave enough to say that in a recreation space and or in a public Canadian space. But I do think we need to ask the question. We need to ask the question, and we were talking about this earlier on today, how many people use that facility? Not how many people walk through the door, or how many counts walk through the door. How many individual unique bodies walk through that door? And how much do we pay for different segments of our community so that we stop asking the question of should we be paying our tax dollars for those that we're not serving, right? We need to look at everything a little bit differently. Thank you very much, Jackie, for not only doing this on a time zone, because Jackie's only been here from New Brunswick for a couple of days, so she's still very much on the Atlantic time zone. So thank you very much for that. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's been a long day. Please join us for some eats and drinks in the lobby, and we'll see most of you tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. If we could bring the house lights up so people could walk out, that'd be fantastic. Okay, sleep around. Yeah.
Oh, I knew I was. That was a given.